What is up, people? Fario here from AwesomeTudes.com, and before you start with this video, just quickly, I wanted to tell you that you can go on my website here, AwesomeTudes.com, and then you can go under download free assets, and there you can download free assets. Now, these are commercial free assets. They are not assets for this tutorial. The assets for this tutorial, this dark cave, you can find, link is in the description below, so you can get them from that link. But these are other commercial free assets that you can use to develop your own games, and you have 3D assets, 2D assets, backgrounds, and whatnot, and I keep adding new and new stuff. So you should definitely check this out, and yeah, enjoy the video. Now that we have our player and we applied physics to him, let's move our player and make him walk. In order to do that, we need to create a new script. So first, I am gonna right click and create a new folder, which is gonna be scripts. And now going inside of the scripts folder, I'm again gonna right click and create another folder, which I am gonna call player scripts, because I like to arrange or to organize my project like this. Inside of the player scripts, I'm gonna right click and create a new C# script, which I am gonna call player walk. And before we do anything, I am gonna attach it on the player in the hierarchy or the gameplay view, or this hierarchy here that contains our elements. So I'm gonna attach it there, and now we can simply double click on the script here, or from the player where the script is attached on him, we can double click on it and it will be opened here in Mono Develop. Now, first I am gonna tag the end of the class by typing a command called class, just so that I know where, let me just see what is going on. I'm gonna attach it here, and I am gonna quit right here. So I'm gonna stop it. Don't know why it is running right away. So this will tag the class so that I know where this end curly bracket for the class is. And I am gonna remove this from here, and I'm gonna remove this from here, which are the comment or the comments. So now that we want to move our player, the first thing that we need are the variables that are gonna move the player. So again, we are going back to the variables that I said, well, we do everything with variables. We do the calculations, we move the player and whatnot. So I am gonna create a public float called speed, which is equal to 30f. Or 30, which is the value. I'm gonna say comma, I'm gonna say max velocity is equal to 4f. Now, before you get all confused, and we did not do this, what does this mean? Well, this is just a shortcut. So writing here comma and then max velocity is the same thing as typing public float max velocity is equal to, let's say, 3f. A shortcut if we want to create a variable of the same type. So both of these variables are floats. So instead of writing 2 lines of code, we can write that in 1 line of code by simply typing here comma and then another name for the variable. So now essentially we are saying we have a float variable called speed, which is equal to 30, and a float variable called max velocity, which is equal to 4. This public here means that this float will be accessible in this class and in other classes, and it will also mean that it will be visible here in the inspector panel. Notice now in the player walk script, notice here we have the speed and the velocity right here where it says the script. So notice here we have, and we can manipulate it. So now the value is 30 because we set the value to be 30 here, but we can manipulate this value and change it to 40 or to 50 or however we want it. So this is what public means. Next, we are gonna have 2 more variables, which are called, or we are gonna make them private. So it's gonna be rigid body 2D, which I'm gonna call my body. And that is that for now. The private means now that this will not be visible here in the inspector panel, and it will only be accessible inside of this class. So private means only ours. And rigid body 2D actually refers to the rigid body that we have attached to our player in the previous video. So in order to move our player, we need to get a reference to the rigid body, and we do that by using getComponent. And I'm gonna do that instead of the start, I'm gonna do that in the awake function. Awake function is same as the start function, but awake will be called before start function. Now, when we run our game, the first function that's gonna be called in every script is the awake function, and this is where it is recommended to initialize your variables. So for example, now we need a reference to our rigid body. So here I am going to type my body is equal to get component, and I'm going to pass here the rigid body component that I want to get. This get component is available here in MonoDevelop, and here we are specifying that we are inheriting from MonoDevelop. So that means that we also can inherit the functions that MonoDevelop has, and one of those functions is get component. And that means it will get the component that is attached, which is our rigid body. Get component means that anything that we attach here, which is visible in the inspector panel, like the rigid body, box collider, even the player walk script, we can get a reference to it by typing get component. And we are going to do this in the awake function. We can do it in the start, but it is better to do this in the awake function. Of course, since we are only doing it for one component, which is the rigid body 2D, this will not hurt our game performance at all. But if, let's say, we are getting thousands of rigid bodies, then it is better to do that in awake. So now that we have that in the awake, what we need to do is we need to create a function. So I'm going to go here right below our update function, and I'm going to create a private function, which is going to be private void because it does not return nothing. So it does not return anything. Void means nothing. So here I'm going to say player walk keyboard. This is the name of the function. And here we are going to detect the movement of our player. So first things first, I'm going to create a float, which I'm going to call force x, which is equal to 0. And I'm going to create a float, which is velocity, which is going to be equal to, and we're going to use mathf, which is available to us. So mathf.abs. This means absolute value. Don't be thinking about abs like I have muscle abs. No, this is not about that. This is not a fitness course, okay? It's a course about game development. And we are going to get the velocity from the rigid body. So I'm going to say my body.velocity.x. This is going to get us the x velocity of the rigid body. And this mathf abs, which is the absolute value, so abs is short for absolute value, it's going to make this number positive every time. So now we are going to test. So we're going to say here float h is equal to input, and this is how we get or detect when the user presses a keyboard. So we are going to say input.getAxisRaw, and here we are going to pass a string as a parameter, and that string is going to be horizontal. So horizontal is going to detect when we press either the A or the D key, or when we press the left or the right arrow key, which means horizontal, that is the x-axis, moving the player left and right. And this getAxisRaw is going to return a number between -1, or it is going to return -1, 0, or 1. -1, it will be when we press the left arrow key or A key on the keyboard. And 0 will be when we don't press any key at all. 1 will be when we press the D key or the right arrow key on our keyboard. So now we are simply going to test if h is greater than 0. So if h is greater than 0, that means we are moving to the right side, because I already said h is going to be 1 when we either press the D key or the right arrow key. So if h is greater than 0, then we are going to move to the right side. So now we are going to test. If we are going to the right side, we are going to test how our velocity is. So if our velocity is greater than the maximum velocity, so if vel is less than the maximum velocity, then we are going to push our player even forward. So here I'm going to say force x is equal to speed, like this. And so far so good. Here I'm going to say else if, and I'm going to say h is less than. So if h is less than 0, meaning we are going to the left side. And again, we're going to test if our velocity is less than maximum velocity. And if this is true, so maximum velocity here, if this is true, we are going to say force, so force x is going to be equal to the negative speed. And the last thing that we need to do is we need to go right here at the bottom, and we need to say my body dot add force, and we are going to apply here a new vector 2, which is a parameter, and we need to pass x and the y. For the x is going to be force x, and for the y it's going to be 0. So what is going on here? Well, first things first, we created a force X, which is going to be applied here to the, well, body, the rigid body of our player. Next, we are getting our own velocity. So we are getting the velocity from my rigid body dot x, which means the horizontal velocity. And then we are getting the input from our user. And of course, here we are converting that value to a positive value. So no matter what this number here is, it will always be positive because we used MATLAB, which is absolute value, which will give us the absolute value. So now we are getting the input from the user. So now we are testing with the input. If the input or age is greater than 0, we are going to the right side, and I already explained why. Because when we press the right or the D key, we are gonna go to the right side, and this age is gonna be, or it's gonna have a value of 1. Else, if we press the A key or we press the left arrow key, this right here is gonna have, or this age is gonna have a value of -1. So if it's greater than 0, we are going to the right side, and we are gonna test if our own velocity, this one right here that we got here from our body, is less than the maximum velocity, which is this one right here that we already created. This maximum velocity is going to allow us to control the speed of our player. So if our current velocity is less than the maximum velocity, that means that our player can still move. So force X is going to be equal to speed now, which is equal to 30, but when we created the force X, it's equal to 0. So now we are setting it to be equal to 30, or speed, which at the end will add to our force and move the player to the right side. We're doing the same thing here, except we are adding the negative value of the speed because we want to move to the left side. In Unity, coordinate system is like this. So to the left side is the negative side, and the right side is the positive. Up is the positive on the y-axis, and down is the negative on the y-axis. And we can test it out. So you can go here, and instead of update, I am gonna type here fixed. This is also a function, fixed update, and the difference between update and fixed update is that update is called every frame per second. So if we have 60 frames in a second, this update, so only update, not the fixed update function, will be called 60 times in a second. But the fixed update is called every 2 or 3 or 4 frames. So not every frame, but every 2 or 3, 4 frames it is called, which means that doing physics calculations like this here, it's better to do in the fixed update than to do in the update. Physics calculations involved my body, as we did here, or the rigid body, which we got here in the awake using getComponent. So now we can simply type here player walk keyboard, that is. So player walk keyboard. Let me just call the function, okay. Player walk keyboard. Does it work? Thank you. Come again. And that is that. We have attached our script on the player. Everything is good to go. If I run the game, I will be able to move the player. Notice I'm moving the player left and right, and we can go here. Notice I can increase the maximum velocity, let's say to 7. Let's say to 7. Notice how faster the player is going to move now. If I increase the speed from 30, let's say to 60, notice how fast the player is going to go now. So he is going much faster, but the velocity, the maximum velocity does not allow him to go any faster than that. So if I, let's say, set the maximum velocity to 20, notice this now. Notice how fast the player is. And this is the beauty of using these variables in the inspector panel, making them public as we did. We can manipulate them right away and see the result right here in our gameplay scene. And notice how fast the player is. And this is how you are gonna tweak your settings. So you're gonna make these variables public, and then you're gonna tweak them a little bit, and afterwards you're gonna memorize the numbers that you're satisfied with and leave them as that. I am satisfied with the speed 30 and the maximum velocity of 4, which is this right here that we see. This is gonna be the movement of our player, so on and so forth. So instead of making them public now, I'm simply gonna go back and make them private because I do not want to edit them anymore. And that's that. So this was it for moving the player. Next, what we need to do is we need to animate the player. And for that, we need to create his animations and play them using the animator, which we are gonna do starting next video. So see you guys in the next one.